Part of knowing the rules is knowing when to break them, especially when it makes the game more fun for you and the rest of the people at your table. If you're not already familiar with the multiclassing rules, I would review pages 163 to 165 of the player's handbook. I'm going to assume that you have a good awareness of how multiclassing functions in this video, and mostly talk about strategic reasons to multiclass and tactics for doing so. And with that out of the way, let's talk about what multiclassing is good at. Multiclassing allows you to use features that often define a class, such as a Paladin's Divine Smite or Warlock's Eldritch Blast, while maintaining the core of another class. It allows you to gain features like medium or heavy armor proficiency without the heavy feat investment. Multiclassing can also be used to combine classes that work better together than they do alone. This is usually the case when you want to use more spellcasting on a half or third caster like an Artificer, Paladin, Arcane Trickster, or Eldritch Knight. I'm going to generally lump multiclassing into two general categories: dippers and splitters. Dippers are looking to maintain most of the traits of one class, while taking 1 to 3 levels from another class. A good example of this is a wizard, who takes up worship of a god and becomes a cleric in order to get medium or heavy armor. Splitters usually keep their class levels roughly equal to benefit from the scaling of both classes. A splitter usually plans on taking 5 or more levels into both classes that they are multiclassing into. An Arcane Trickster and Bladesinger multiclass may want both the spell scaling and the extra attack from Bladesinger, and the defensive utility features from Rogue. Splitters may also simply stop taking levels in a class after they run out of relevant features in the class. A good example of this would be a Barbarian who gets to level 7 or 8, realizes that they don't have much to gain by continuing to get levels in Barbarian, and multiclasses into Fighter for the remainder of their levels. This categorization is pretty meaningless within Tier 1, however, because every multiclass is a dipper. While you're still in Tier 1, you can't multiclass and have more than 2 levels in the class that you're multiclassing into, which means all multiclasses within Tier 1 should be evaluated as dips rather than splits. What are the upsides to dipping? Well, dipping is very strong if you want a feature from another class, usually because that feature works better for your primary class than it does for the class that you're dipping into. The infamous Sorkadin and Sorklock builds both rely on using the level 2 features of both Paladin, Divine Smite, and Warlock, Agonizing Blast, respectively. The full caster scaling of Sorcerer and the ability to quicken and twin spells mean that the Sorcerer can frequently attack more times than the Paladin and use their Divine Smites for longer, and can output twice as much damage using Eldritch Blast and have a full caster's amount of slots rather than using a Warlock's Pact magic. Common dips include trying to take Rage, Reckless Attack, and possibly even a subclass from a Barbarian, medium or heavy armor from a Cleric, unarmored defense from a Monk, armor, a fighting style, and action surge from Fighter, armor and Divine Smite from Paladin, Dread Ambusher from the Gloomstalker Ranger, expertise, cunning action, and rarely a subclass feature from Rogue, and Eldritch Blast, invocations, and potent subclass features from Warlock. Dipping, however, does not come without a price. The most obvious cost to dipping is the delayed progression. A full caster that dips into another class will be a level behind on spells, whereas marshals will be similarly delaying their progression. Dipping early can result in missing important breakpoints, importantly missing the critical power spike achieved at level 5, when marshals get extra attacks and full casters get 3rd level spells. A less obvious cost of dipping is the ability score train. You must meet the prerequisites to multiclass, which is usually not a problem for warlocks discovering their inner sorcerer, but can be a problem for wizards trying to get their cleric on, or for more obscure multiclasses like trying to play a strength-based monk who dips cleric for heavier armor. Something else important to consider when taking a dip is what class features you are giving up by taking a dip. What you give up obviously depends on how long you expect your campaign to go, but if you expect the campaign to go to a level 11, a fighter giving up their 3rd attack is obviously much more expensive than a barbarian giving up a relentless rage, or a ranger giving up their subclass feature. This matters a lot more when you expect to go all the way to level 20, because you will typically play more sessions at level 20 than at other levels, but it's important to consider no matter when you are planning to stop. If you're going to level 20, you should also carefully consider your capstones. Some capstones are excellent, like the barbarians, clerics, druids, or fighters, whereas other capstones like the monks and the wizards are pretty subpar. When should you take a dip? Generally, a dip is warranted if your class has a weakness that is easily covered by 1 or a few levels in another class, and your end-of-campaign features are bad. A wizard might take a single level in cleric to go from having rather poor AC to excellent AC. A paladin might take a hexplay dip to unify all of their stats into using charisma to benefit from elven accuracy. Both of these classes also have rather subpar capstones. Dipping is generally a bad idea when it significantly hampers your progression, eliminates powerful features from your repertoire, or accomplishes something easily achieved by a feat. For example, dipping other classes on a fighter is generally not a great idea, because they have little to gain from a 1 to 2 level dip in other classes that cannot be obtained by a feat. It eliminates their 4th attack and delays all of their other features. While dipping Cleric is a great idea for wizards because it grants them medium armor, warlocks are likely just better off taking the moderately armored feat because they meet the prerequisites already. Another thing I see people dipping for a lot is flavor, but I would argue that a lot of the time you can get the flavor you want from a feat or simply reflavoring another feature instead. If you want to play a werewolf character, you don't necessarily need to take a dip into Moondruid in order to become a wolf. If the character is a barbarian, they could transform into a hybrid-like creature when they're raging, or if they're a wizard, perhaps they would transform when they cast Vampiric Touch and start biting people rather than just trying to touch them. A character that makes a pact with a demon could get the Magic Initiate feat instead of taking levels in Warlock. Finally, we can now answer the question of how to dip. Generally, there are two paths you can take towards dipping. The first is to start as the class that you are dipping. This is generally a good idea if that class has much better saves than your primary class, or if it starts with additional resources. For example, rogues get an extra skill proficiency if you start as one compared to if you multiclass into it. The other path you can take is to wait until you get a major power spike from your primary class before you dip. As mentioned before, missing 3rd level spells and extra attack can be bad, but missing your CR breakpoints on Wild Shape, your Paladin auras, and certain subclass features can also be very sad. 11th level is also a powerhouse for many classes, granting 6th level spells, a fighter's 3rd attack, Paladin's improved Divine Smite, and a rogue's reliable talent. If you wait until after this power spike, you will get stronger progression throughout the rest of your adventuring career. The other path you can take is to split your classes roughly evenly, planning on taking 5 or more levels in both classes. Splitting has the upside of taking classes that are independently strong and combining their strong class features into robust progression. Generally, splitting is better for classes that have some inherent synergy together, especially for half and third casters with full casters. There are 2 classes that also regrettably stop getting class features at around level 10, the Barbarian and the Ranger. While the Barbarian somewhat makes up for this with their powerful level 20 abilities, Rangers do not, and both of these are prime candidates for splitting. The main downside of splitting is that you never get high-level class features for either class. You'll never get your 30-foot Paladin aura, your 8th or 9th level spells, or your 2nd action surge. Splitting can also have rather poor progression in places where you will not have enough levels of either class to act effectively as either one. Many splits are also very multiple attribute dependent, or MAD. Because you are going so far into both classes, you need the stats to make both work. Some classes, such as Fighter and Barbarian, can easily work off of the same stats, while others, like Monk and Paladin, cannot. This forces you to either rely on magic items that set your ability scores in order to boost them, lose out on many feats, or have low stats and be relatively weak in one or both classes. Even a simple multiclass that relies on the same stats for both classes, like an Arcane Trickster and a Bladesinger, would love to get 20 in both dexterity and intelligence, but using point buy, that would leave them with 0 additional feats. One frequent mistake I see when people try to split is that they overvalue ability score increases, or ASCIIs. Generally, one only needs 4 ASCIIs over their entire venturing career. 2 for raising their primary stat to 20, and 2 for picking up key feats for the build, like your power attack and bonus feats, or your defensive feats like Resilient and Mobile. Trying to cram extra ASCIIs into the mix isn't likely going to help you very much. However, it can rarely be correct to take an ASCII instead of going for an 11-9 or a 7-13 split. Ask yourself, is the class feature I would gain by giving up this ASCII was a feat? How good would it be? Generally, when splitting a full caster, both the 5th and 7th level spells, or really any spells above 3rd level, would be worth taking a feat for, as would a fighter's 3rd attack at level 11. But when you look at a fighter's Indomitable feature that it would gain at level 13, it actually compares pretty poorly to Lucky or Resilient, so an ASCII would be better if that was your only option. Finally, you may have noticed that I never covered multi-classes that include 3 or more classes. While such builds can be effective, it is very easy to make a character that either does a lot of things, but all at a very mediocre level, or only does one thing slightly better than a single class character does, but does everything else worse. If you found this guide helpful, or are relying on it for assistance in multiclassing, creating effective triple-class multiclasses is likely beyond your current scope. Effective triple-class multiclasses are rare, and the good ones are pretty well documented by now, so my recommendation is to look at more specific guides if you want to play one of those rather than try and create your own. That's all I've got for you today. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you like it and subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future.